Guys, who has the best 18-volt cordless router? Well, the Toolbox Buzz crew wanted to know too, so we routed well over a half mile of stock to give you the result. We looked at 5 routers: DEWALT, Makita, Milwaukee, RIDGID, and Ryobi. And like any of our head-to-heads, if you want to learn more information about the model numbers or the specs, or just do a deeper dive, you need to go to the Toolbox Buzz website and read the article. It's all there. We conducted 2 relative measurable comparison tests in this head-to-head. We looked at performance or power and then runtime. We felt strongly that these tests give you an excellent baseline on overall tool performance. Additionally, each of the crew members spent time using the routers to evaluate them and to evaluate them independently on things like features, ergonomics. Of course, we did the performance and the runtime testing, and then we looked at pricing, bare tool pricing, which gives us best overall tool. I do want to thank Rockler Woodworking. They provided the bits for this testing. They work great, and we appreciate the help on the test. All right, let's get into the test. We looked at best features, and the winner of best features was the DEWALT. Each of the tools were ranked 1 through 5, 1 being the best, to determine the best feature ranking. We use this ranking throughout. The DEWALT barely took first place. It came in at 12 points, but that was just 1 point ahead of Milwaukee. The Makita and the RIDGID were 3rd and 4th, with 23 and 24 points respectively. Now the DEWALT, it pretty much scored a 1 or 2 score on almost every category except the base plate, and we talked about that later. Let's look at some of those features. For instance, the power switch. The best switch was the Makita, DEWALT, Milwaukee, in that order. Makita has a 2-step safety switch. Basically, there's an unlock button that puts the tool into a standby mode, and then the power button turns on the router. If the tool is inactive for 10 seconds, the router locks, so you have to use the unlock button again. This separate lock button might seem like a pain in the neck, but I think it's pretty good for preventing accidental startups. We'd just like to see maybe a longer timeout time than 10 seconds, maybe 20. All right, the RIDGID router, it has a pull-out mechanical switch in order to turn it on and off. The switch is awkward to use, difficult to reach, and not intuitive. The team did not like that switch. Switch placement was also considered in the routers, and those routers that had ambidextrous switch placement, they fared better. For example, Makita and Ryobi switch placement is on the front and rear of the tools respectively. Alternatively, the DEWALT and Milwaukee are geared towards right-handed users. The switch is on the left side. So we looked at variable speed adjustments. The DEWALT had the best variable speed adjustment, followed by the RIDGID and Makita. DEWALT and RIDGID variable speed dials, they're basically set up ambidextrous setup. It's located on the back of the tool, easy to use with either hand. The Makita and Milwaukee are set up for right-handed users, again on the left side, so you hit it with your thumb. As a right-handed user, the dial's perfectly placed for me. Right where my thumb is, it was perfect. But lefties don't like it so much. The Milwaukee variable speed dial also has these protruding ribs on them, which made it really easy to kind of grip and use. No slipping. The Makita, on the other hand, the speed dial is recessed into the tool. It was difficult to kind of reach and use, but it was the smoothest of all the routers to operate. We looked at the base depth adjustments. All the routers have quick release levers, but they do differ in style and quality of their micro and macro adjustments. For example, Makita uses a quick release cam lever to adjust or remove the router base. But for micro adjustments, they utilize a rack and pinion depth adjustment system. This adjustment is smooth, it's fast, and it's super easy to use. But it does have some slop in the mechanism, which made micro adjustments difficult. The best base adjustment of all the routers was the Milwaukee, and it utilizes a push button macro adjustment and a dial for the micro adjustments. You could dial it right in. The micro adjustment knob of the Milwaukee is rubberized, it's easy to grip. We found it precise and smooth. One really nice feature on the RIDGID and Ryobi routers is their micro adjust dial, and obviously for dialing in the depth of cut. They were super, super easy to use. The RIDGID, when we were testing it, the quick release lever had to be adjusted by the team prior to testing because it was loose and not holding adjustment. Okay, the DEWALT adjustment was also precise, but different. It has a screw to adjust and a thread cut into the router housing barrel. They call it a depth adjustment ring. The ring is used for micro adjustments, but also larger macro adjustments. We liked the precision of the ring, but not the slower speed. Okay, well, one thing I also want to mention about the DEWALT is while setting it up for runtime testing, we noticed that if you actually grip the tool high by that depth adjustment ring, the tool comes out of adjustment. We tightened the quick release lever twice on the tool, but it still occurred. So as a result, we had to be cognizant not to grip the DEWALT router high. This is something that maybe DEWALT might want to look at, or something that we found, we basically found it annoying and a problem if you want to maybe set this tool up as a windowsill set and forget tool. You got to just be cognizant that you can't grip it there. Okay, all of the routers have at least one LED light. The DEWALT, Makita, and Milwaukee have 2 LEDs on them. The brightest light is the Milwaukee, followed by the DEWALT and the Makita. Let me see, all 3 of those routers, their LEDs, they cast shadowless light. Great line of sight, really bright. The DEWALT LED will actually stay on for 20 seconds after the tool's turned off. Milwaukee stays on for 15 seconds, and the Makita stays on for 12 seconds. All the routers seem to have an electric brake on them. With regard to stopping the router bit, the DEWALT and the Milwaukee stop the bit, boom, instantly shuts off. The other routers take a second or two to kind of spin down before the electric brakes turn off. Huge safety factor. All right, base plates. The team really liked the DEWALT half round, half square shape plate. The DEWALT pretty much has the best general use or general purpose base plate. The Milwaukee and the RIDGID offer the best value because they come with 2 base plates, the small one and also a larger one, set up for template bushing routing. The Makita had the smallest base plate and was not as stable as the other routers tested. It rocked a little bit. When tested the Makita, we found that our Rockler roundover bit was actually too big and it touched the inner opening of the sub-base. The reasoning for this is that the Makita provides a sub-base plate that it actually comes with and is sized for template bushings. And template bushings are pretty much typically used with mortising hinge jigs and things like that. So in order to use the Makita router, we basically had to put the bit underneath the base, turn it on, and then plunge through the base plate to make it work. Just took off a little bit, but we had to do that. Look, we've worked with many routers in the field, and many users in the field, I should say, and a lot of guys will grab their full-size routers to mortise hinges and because it's got that wide base, the sub-base. A lot of folks are afraid that if they use a compact router, it will dip or rock in the jig and ruin their cut. So I think Makita ought to look at maybe supplying a larger base with that router. Okay, moving on to ergonomics. The winner of ergonomics was Milwaukee. Ergonomics is the science of designing and producing tools that improve a worker's efficiency while eliminating discomfort, fatigue, and risk of injury, right? Ergonomically enhanced tools are going to be helpful, and they'll have things like rubber overmold and ambidextrous switches and great lines of sight, stuff like that. So whether you're shopping for an ergonomic tool or you're trying to select one right for the job or maybe build your existing collection, you do want to consider ergonomics. It's important. It can lead to less fatigue and less injury. So the Milwaukee scored 1 and 2 in every single category except its weight and usability of the switch. And it came in first place with 12 points. It's a very comfortable tool to use for long periods of time. Following in second place was the DEWALT with 14 points, and then Makita with 18 points in third place. As far as grip, you might not pay much attention to a grip of a compact router, but if you're mass producing stock for a project, grip matters. The best router grip was the Milwaukee, has a full rubberized coverage. The second was the Makita. Both of these designs are very similar in size and shape, and both companies have seemed to found kind of a sweet spot with their overmold grip and the diameter of the barrel. The Ryobi also has a comfortable grip, but it's slightly bulkier and it's top heavy with the stem pack battery. The DEWALT, on the other hand, has a larger barrel than the rest, and it results in a much less comfortable grip and fatigue over time. Weight. The lightest router, bare tool, was the RIDGID, followed by the Ryobi. When the Ryobi has a 6 amp hour battery attached to it, it's 11 inches tall, the second tallest router in the pack, second only to DEWALT, which is 11 1/4 inches. Weight in this test directly related to size as well. The DEWALT is the thickest diameter router, like I said, and it's also the heaviest. Users with larger hands, they're going to find the DEWALT pretty comfortable, but we found it a little bit too big, the diameter too big. We looked at ease of bit changing, and oftentimes, you need to engage that spindle lock to change and rotate the spindle shaft to engage the lock. The DEWALT, it has the best spindle lock of all of them. It has 12 indents, or detents, that you can easily and quickly lock in almost any direction. This spindle lock also allows you to loosen and tighten through a ratcheting between the collet and the wrench, which is really nice. Now Milwaukee's close, so it's got 6 spindle lock positions. The other 3 routers, they basically have a hole cut through their shaft and allows for 2 positions, 180 degrees in either direction, to engage that spindle lock. With regard to the actual spindle lock button, Makita was superior to the others. Okay, let's talk about adjusting the depth of cut. Ergonomically speaking, the easiest base adjustment of all the routers was Milwaukee, utilizing that push button macro adjustment and then the dial for the micro that we talked about. The rubberized knob was awesome. We found it easy to adjust and precise. So, line of sight. It's no secret that the routers with the larger base opening on the side and a better LED had a better line of sight. The DEWALT and the Milwaukee both have the largest base openings at 2 5/8 and 2.5 respectively. The larger openings, you could see in there, you could see the bit, you could see your work, and the light just lit it right up. We also looked at fit and finish, but we didn't score it. Fit and finish showed in this test. DEWALT, Makita, Milwaukee all have these durable aluminum router housings. RIDGID and Ryobi have plastic housings. Better quality construction, materials, seams, adjustments, they do show through. So one thing that we noticed that unlike the other routers in the test was the Ryobi housing. At the very top where the shaft and the router bit is, it's completely sealed. And this design means that it's not going to blow any chips away for you, but we also were wondering about airflow, lack of cooling vents basically, and how it would impact the tool long-term longevity. We actually reached out to Ryobi, we talked to them. They told us they have 0 problems with overheating or returns due to those lack of vents there. So we're in good shape there. Okay, let's talk about our runtime test procedure. In order to simulate a real carpentry application for runtime testing, we used a windowsill routing procedure. This is an application that directly relates to trim carpenters out in the field. A 3/8 round over bit and bearing we used, and we basically routed 2 sides of a 7-foot poplar board. The testing procedure was pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Each router received a new Rockler 3/8 inch round over bit. A brass setup bar was used to set the depth of the bits, so they're all the same. Each router used a fully charged 6 amp hour battery. All the routers were set to their highest speed. And then once we started routing, we used a 1 to 2 second per foot feed rate as we went through the test. 7 feet of the board was routed on all 4 edges, would flip it over and do all 4. We would rest the tool while we went to the table saw and ripped those edges off. And we basically repeated that procedure until the router was unable to complete the procedure. Either overheated or just runtime stopped. This was an aggressive test, but it's realistic if a carpenter is mass producing all of the windowsills in a house, a large house. Okay, it's time to talk about the runtime test results, and the winner of that was DEWALT. During this test, over 3,500 linear feet of poplar was used. The DEWALT cordless router came in first place. It blew away the competition by routing 472.5 linear feet, which equals 157.5 3-foot windowsills, or a bit under 1/5 of a mile. Second place was the RIDGID with 364 lineal feet, and that equals 121 windowsills. And then coming up in third place was Makita. Makita routed 318.5 linear feet, and that, my friends, is 106 windowsills. That's pretty amazing. We noticed that the DEWALT and the Milwaukee plowed through the material with ease, while Makita was slower to cut, and the RIDGID was slower to cut as well, but also had more noticeable vibration than the DEWALT, Makita, and Milwaukee. The Ryobi felt similar to the RIDGID in terms of vibration, but also was more top heavy, and that's probably a result to its size and the stem pack battery that sits up on the top there. Okay, let's go to the performance test procedure. So for this test, or power test, we wanted to determine the relative performance of the individual routers. So we used a test rig to keep all the variables the same. This test shows the router with the highest performance removes plywood material faster than the other slower materials or machines. This test is less about speed and more about power of the router. So in order to simulate a real carpentry application for this test, we used a dado routing procedure. Basically, a 1/2 inch dado bit was used to cut a 1/10 of an inch deep dado in AC plywood. Here's our procedure and how we did this. We used a new 1/2 inch router bit, a 2-winged carbide dado bit from Rockler, and we put a new one on every router. We used a fully charged 6 amp hour battery for each router. The same sheet of 3/4 AC plywood provided all 5 pieces for all 14 cuts for the routers. A CNC router station ensured constant dimension and auto setting of depth of cut. A constant weight through a pulley system basically applied equal force, and that pulled the CNC gantry to move the router. All the routers were set and operated at their highest RPM setting, and the amount of time that it took each router to plunge through that plywood for 14 cuts was recorded. So who won that test, performance test? DEWALT. AC plywood was used on these tests, and I want to just say that carpenters use AC plywood to make plywood boxes and shelves and all stuff like that. And the bits we use pretty much are designed to make plywood-sized dado bits or rabbet cuts, right? So this particular performance test was run multiple times to even out the differences in the density of that individual piece of plywood. The test was performed 7 times through the rough C side of the plywood and 7 more times on the A side of the plywood. Observations that we made showed that the times in the C side of the plywood were consistently faster than the A side. This result was true for all the routers in this test that completed the test, and we assumed that the C side contains less dense sets of plies or plywood plies than the A side. The difference between the 2 sides of plywood is shown in our graph, and I'll show that to you. So the A side of the plywood cuts was the 8th through the 14th of the cuts, just so you can figure that out. One clear surprise was the performance of the RIDGID router in the performance test. The RIDGID, it only cut 4 3/4 long dado into the plywood on the first attempt, and on the second attempt it only cut a 3 5/8 long dado. As a result, we declared the RIDGID a DNF, did not finish. It just couldn't complete the test. Not sure why. The DEWALT was the clear winner of this test. It averaged 6.1 seconds to cut a dado in 48-inch long piece of AC plywood. It was almost 25% faster than the second runner-up, Makita. Makita was second average, and it averaged a time of 7.5 seconds. Ryobi and Milwaukee finished times with 8.5 and 9.2 seconds respectively. A logical conclusion here might be that to put your bet on the router with the highest RPM, given that it has more cuts per unit time or whatever, right? Well, the Milwaukee router has the highest unloaded RPM at 31,000 RPMs, but it placed 4th out of those routers. The DEWALT is the slowest of the RPM, it was almost the slowest with 25,500 RPMs and at 1. We think it's a combination of the rotational speed coupled with the highest delivered torque that wins this test. Okay, now the next thing we looked at was pricing evaluation, and we looked at bare tool. Now the winner of the least expensive router was the Ryobi, but the winner, best value, was Makita. Makita router tied for second for lowest price router in this test, but it came out near the top in a lot of the testing we did. It's a no-brainer selection and a great value router. And guys, pricing is a key part in the purchasing mix, and it's crucial that you get it right to determine the best cordless router. So for this head-to-head, we did look at bare tool pricing. We wanted to eliminate discrepancies in the composition of kits that many manufacturers provide. One interesting thing to note is the Milwaukee bare tool also comes with value-added accessories as a bare tool. Clearly, Milwaukee was thinking of the users and common applications. The accessories with their bare tool include a dust shroud, a straight edge guide, which fits common jigs, and you know, without dipping into it like the hinge jig I talked about, a larger 5 3/4 inch sub base for that template bushing. Oh, and the Makita cordless router bare tool it's a mirror image of their corded compact router. That means that all of their accessories, like their plunge bases, their tilt bases, the guides and dust shrouds, are going to fit their cordless router. And clearly Makita was thinking of tool users when they, you know, maybe making that transition from corded to cordless, and they made it more cost effective for you. The RIDGID router as a bare tool comes with a straight edge setup, a larger rounded sub base that also has an opening sized for template bushings, and a storage bag. So best in class router. Who took it? DEWALT. Overall winner was the DEWALT, the DCW 600. It carved up almost a fifth of a mile of rounded over trim on a 6 amp battery charge. It took first place, ranking 9 points. The new Milwaukee, the 2723-20, came in a close second with 11 points. It won the ergonomics category and was a strong finisher in all the other tests. The Makita router is a great value, was smooth to operate and precise. It took third place with a score of 12 points, right on the heels of Milwaukee. RIDGID and the Ryobi routers certainly held their own in the competition with impressive runtimes and power testing, respectively. The fact that we now have a choice in cordless trim routers that are real workhorses and consistently performed as well as their corded versions, but without the cord, you gotta love that. Guys, I'm Rob Robillard. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please consider subscribing. Leave us a comment. We'd like to hear from you. And we'll see you next time here at Toolbox Buzz.